Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. As I explained, unfortunately, I'm a little bit tired today, but I'm going to do my best here. So what I wanted to speak to you about today was the evolving role of the CISO. And I think we're finding more and more that the role of a CISO is getting more complicated. And we've got some people sitting in a technical space, some people coming from a risk space. And I wanted to speak to you about how we can blend that together and make it better and face some of the challenges that we need to face. And I appreciate that not everybody sitting in the room here is a CISO, but a lot of you probably either work for a CISO or are aspiring to be a CISO one day. So hopefully some of this will resonate with you. So, first thing I wanted to do was kind of break down, what some of the tasks and, concepts about being a CISO are. So, a lot of it really depends on like the previous background that you've come from. So, some CISOs that we come across are people who have driven business and they have some kind of cyber aspect. They've kind of got risk strategy, and that sort of thing within them. And, if you notice some of the statistics we have there, they're about what people currently view themselves as and what they'd like to be at in the future. So a lot of CISOs think they've got about 15% strategy in there and, maybe about 32% would like to have more strategy in there. So that actually is quite telling to me because, a CISO in an organization, if you're sitting up at C-level and you're actually a CISO as opposed to a head of information security or an information security officer, you really should be thinking strategically for your organization and making sure that you're aligning the security you have around your key assets and the business strategy and what's actually important within your business. So it's interesting that only 15% of CISOs think that they think of themselves as a strategist at the moment. So others think of themselves as an advisor. So 12% of people currently view themselves as a CISO who is advising the business. And again, to me, I'm thinking, well, 12%, but 35% think that they'd like to. And I think some of the challenges around this are that often people don't really engage with us as the security professionals until the last minute. So they'll push out projects and then they think, we'll get this over the line. Security are just going to say no as we put this out. So let's just not engage until the last minute rather than being an advisor going along the path, which is the way people are desiring. That's what the CISOs actually want to do. So 41% of CISOs view themselves as being a guardian, that they're protecting the business assets. And I think this is traditionally where CISOs tend to see themselves in that space. And then 33% view themselves as being technologists. And obviously you can view yourself as being multiples of these. But I think it's where people don't have all of these aspects, because in the real world, a good CISO should have a bit of all of these parts in their offering and what they can give to organizations. Then you need to go out and identify what you don't have and start adding it to your portfolio. So if you've come from a technical background, it's a really good idea that you might go off and do something like an MBA or go and study strategy and study what your actual core business is doing. And vice versa, if you're coming from the business side, to go off and start studying technology and make sure that you really understand the technology. Because we do see a lot of CISOs today who don't really have that technological background, but they are advising the business and they're relying on people working for them and trusting the people that are working in their team to actually advise the right things up the line. But my own view is that as a CISO that you should have good technical knowledge in order to be able to assess the risks and evaluate what's being told to you by your team and actually to pass the message up down the line so that people can understand what the risks to the business are. CISO should really be viewed as a trusted advisor in the business and not somebody who you're being told at the last minute what exactly is going on. And we see this now, I see it every day as being a huge issue where you come to a project, 90% of it's done, they've done all the testing to make sure the user acceptance testing, and somebody goes at the last minute, I suppose we better put that through a pen test before we put it out, and then suddenly the whole thing fails and the project's put back and everybody blames security, whereas the reality is it's not security that was the problem. It's the fact that the project managers or the people who were developing the project or the business didn't engage with security early enough in the cycle to make sure that they were going to get the product out on time or whatever their new greatest invention is. So at the moment, statistically, we see about 50% of CISOs come from an IT background. But the converse of that is that 50% of CISOs do not come from an IT background. And I suppose in my mind, I want to see both of those types of individuals learning what the other one knows and getting a blend together so that we have a good CISOs who can do everything. So some of the challenges that a CISO would face today, the skills required to do the job are very broad. You must be able to understand the technology that your business is using in order to push the business out there. But you also need to be able to speak risk when it comes to trying to persuade people to part with money. Because if you go to the board and start speaking a whole load of techno-babble and, this and a hacked here and a cross-site script in there, whatever, nobody's going to say, oh, I'll give you lots of money to sort that out. Whereas if you start saying, well, actually, we have a key risk that our business could be offline for multiple days if we don't put proper DDoS mitigation facilities in place for this key website that we're offering all our business over. They hear that differently because they're hearing that as a business risk. We could be down for a few days rather than the technobabble, which we often see being presented at board level. So another challenge that the CISO face today is that the threat landscape and the risks are increasing and becoming more diverse. So the skill sets that you need to be able to understand the threat landscape can actually be very broad, because some of the technical aspects about what actually are the risks within your organization, what are your internal threat landscapes, but also what's going on outside in the world. And the efforts that you have to make in order to stay up to date with this are quite considerable. Sorry, my voice is going, are quite considerable. So, I'm sure all of you sitting here, if you're passionate about this, which you probably are, if you're attending this conference, realize how much effort it takes to stay on top of what is happening around the world. Like what's happening with, kind of inter-country kind of attacks and who are the people that are going to attack your business today and how are they doing that? What kind of trends are in place? Like, we're all probably, I'm sure all your businesses are being hit with things like business email compromise, which sounds like a simple thing to address, but it's not really when we're moving half our kind of email systems out into the cloud and we don't have them under our direct control. We're using third parties. We're letting them manage some of the risk for us. Even though we still own the responsibility, we're letting other people manage that risk. So understanding how that works and your own threat landscape for your own organization is actually a very complex piece of data. The reporting lines that a CISO has is really complex and very different in different organizations. A lot of organizations who will appoint a CISO have the C in front of the name, but they don't have them sitting at the board, which means they're not probably really a CISO if they don't have that kind of chief aspect in there. They're probably a head of information security. And in my world, in my eyes, I think the CISO should have a seat on the board. They should be sitting beside the head of IT, the ICT kind of people. And they need to also have a separate voice from the IT people, because sometimes that voice can get quite filtered. If you're all dealing with the same budget and the CISO is reporting into the head of IT, that can get quite complicated, because there can be conflicts between, are we going to get the product out the door, or are we going to get the product out the door securely, and which commitments have been made, and who is the voice in the boardroom? Is it the delivery, or is it the secure delivery of products? We also see CISOs reporting in within the risk line within organizations as well, which is quite interesting. It can work well, but sometimes you can be a bit divorced from the technology group if you're sitting within the risk group. So I'm not sure that there's an ideal scenario of where a CISO should report in an organization. And I've seen different configurations working very well. I think a lot of it is about the eyes and ears of the board or the senior management, and if they're actually listening to you, and if you have a voice where your voice needs to go and that it's not filtered. So CISO is also competing for limited budget. They're competing probably against innovation and business development projects. So like at the end of the day, businesses are not there to support the information security industry. They're there to support their own business. So security is an overhead. There's no two ways about it. It's very hard to position security as a competitive advantage. Security really is an overhead that's sitting on the business. And it's hard for us as security professionals to sometimes persuade people to part with money that could be used to maybe fund other projects within the business. The regulatory environment is another aspect that is constantly changing. Like in recent years, we've seen GDPR. We're also looking at the NIS directive. We're looking at TIBR coming down the line. There's a lot of things that are in play, and some businesses are more heavily regulated than others. But as a CISO, you need to be really on top of regulations today, but also on top of what's happening tomorrow. Like if you're an organization who's going to be subject to TIBR in the near future, you really do need to get your red teaming and your blue teaming and things off the ground now, rather than waiting until the regulator is going to come in and inspect you, because you can rest assured, no matter how good your security is, the first time you go through a red teaming exercise, everybody is going to be upset at the end of it. Everybody is going to say that was unfair. You know, you had an unfair advantage there. It didn't work. I can't believe that this failed. Our incident response team should have seen that. It's never good the first time, but the second time, it's normally really great because people have learned so much from going through it the first time. So trust me on this. Don't let the first time you do that be with a regulator watching you and your board looking in on you as well. Another challenge that everybody faces, whether you're a CISO or whether you're not a CISO in this space, is the talent skills shortage. And this is leading to a lot of role vacancies. And in fact, we've seen breaches that have been blamed on the fact that people just didn't have the resources in order to do their vulnerability scanning properly, to patch systems and to keep things up to date. And I think that, like, I certainly have a lot of vacancies in my organization at the moment, and I'm sure you're probably all in the same situation. And sometimes it's not because you can't fill a role, sometimes because you can't get budget for a role. But bottom line is we're typically all running on less than optimum numbers of people in security departments in order to achieve what we're being tasked to achieve. Another challenge they have is actually getting a full understanding of the maturity status within the organization. And it's quite a long process to go through and look at all the different aspects of your organization and see, are you mature, or where do you need to develop different aspects, and how good would you be in a response situation if you did actually get attacked, or have you got things secured? Have you identified your assets, and do you know what you've got in your business that you're trying to secure? Breaches and incident response. I think, you know, when people get hit for the first time, they understand how good their incident response is. Most people have a lot of challenges in this space. They may have a policy that was kind of written a couple of years ago and put up on a shelf. Things will have changed. People will have changed. So keeping all that up to date, if you've got a CISO in place, they need to do that. And I suppose that the big one, I think I've already mentioned it, is being consulted and not avoided as things are being done in your organization. So I've already spoken briefly about the reporting lines that we have in a CISO, and I think some of the tips that I would give CISOs kind of in relation to that is that you need to focus on greater business collaboration that enhance the skill sets of both the cyber risk expert and also the business leader. So you need to become the friend of the business. They need to want to reach out to you and feel that you're bringing value to them in making sure that you're delivering secure product to them. And you need to define a model within your business that designates cyber risk champions within different departments, so that people actually, you know, there is a proper pipeline to you, a connection that they can go and talk to you if you're a CISO, and that somebody is within each of the different departments that can actually speak about risk and speak about cyber and raise things for the times that you're not there. So understanding where your cyber maturity level is, I generally break this down into 4 areas. What's your strategy like? You know, do you understand what the business strategy is, and have you aligned also with your IT strategy how you're going to make it work? Like, what are your policies and procedures? Have you got a good governance model in place? And then you're looking at making sure that you've identified your assets and making sure that you're protecting them proportionately to the value of them to the business, not proportionately to how likely it is that something is going to get attacked or hacked, because that doesn't really matter. From the business perspective, they're thinking about the asset, not about the likelihood of an actual attack in a particular area. So you need to be quite proportionate, because you cannot secure everything. You have to presume that there are some areas that will have tighter security over them than others. Then the next thing is, how vigilant are you? Are you actually monitoring what's going on your systems? Would you even know if someone had attacked your systems? And is it going to flag up, or are you going to have a whole load of false positives that you can't work with, that you just don't understand what's going on? And we've seen a lot of hacks happen over the years where people have had genuine attacks where they've written them off as being false positives because they've got so much noise going on in their socks and their seams. And then we also see the reverse where they've tuned something out. I've actually gone in to do incident response with people where I went in and started looking back at what had been happening over previous days, where SOC analysts were actually tuning out problems and saying, I've resolved that now because they just changed the threshold and the problem wasn't happening anymore. So again, making sure that you're monitoring things properly is really important. And then the last thing is, how well can you and your organization respond if you do actually get attacked? So building a strategy that speaks to the business and the board is really important. And part of that is understanding the assets that the business have. And the next thing is trying to look at the risks to those assets, because clearly if some assets are kind of externally facing, the risks of them are going to be very different. If your business has, for example, health data or something like that, which is much more valuable in the open market if it's for sale than typical even credit card data these days. Health data about kids is what people are really after these days. So if you've got that in your business, you need to be really aware of how you're protecting that, because that is a rich source of data and people are going to go after that to attack it and sell it. So having a clean and clear understanding of that and how you're going to treat that is really important. So if you've identified a risk, you can propose a treatment plan, but the IT or the security people should not be the people making the ultimate decision about the focus of that. You should bring that to the business and say, look, we've identified this risk. We can treat it by spending €1 million on it and we think you'll be good. We can treat it by not doing anything at all and just maybe getting some insurance and hoping for the best, and see how it goes. But like that decision is often made in the security department or potentially in IT rather than out in the business. And that's something that we need to stop doing. Stop assuming that, we think this is the right thing or that we have that. And you see it a lot in IT as well, not just in security, where people will cobble something together and make it work because they've done it like for a good cost. Like we saw this with Maersk, where they'd saved so much money and everybody was being rewarded within the business, within IT and security for cost saving. And then they get catastrophically wiped out and they look back and they say one of the main drivers for why they had so much problems and everything disappeared was because of the fact that they had cut their budgets and they were rewarding staff for saving money instead of actually running a good IT department and running good security on it. So the changing threat landscape that we see, it's actually, I kind of run through this exercise with a lot of different organizations, looking at the threat scenarios, the vectors, and the adversaries. And it's really interesting when you actually say to somebody, do you think that a nation state might be interested in your data? And most people, unless they're in government, will say, no, I can't think why. And, it's up to the likes of us to actually challenge an organization and say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And it's quite interesting when you actually dig down both within the security people and actually within the business itself about what they value and what risks they might see, how it can change this landscape. Because when you've actually worked out what the vectors are that your organization is susceptible to, what scenarios could go in place and who could be doing them, you actually get a really good idea of where to focus your budget, your limited budget. You really understand denial of service is really important to us, or theft of data is really important to us. So, and then well, I should invest in DLP, I should invest in DDoS mitigation services, because it kind of bubbles out of this type of analysis if you put the time and effort into it. So the skills shortage. I think one of the things that I see over and over again is boards in Ireland not really being equipped within themselves to actually really understand IT security risks. So it's very important that somebody is feeding that information into them and that they have trusted advisors. So like I do a lot of presentations to boards, and some of the questions they challenge me with are questions that I would never have thought of actually, because they think differently. A lot of them are trained in accountancy or risk, or they just have a different mindset than somebody who's been trained maybe from an engineering or a technology background. So it's very interesting to hear the questions they raise, but it's also very interesting to try to educate them in the way we might be thinking about the risks and what risks they're facing. And I find doing things like wargaming with them, it's a simple exercise, spending half an hour with your board and your organization and running through a scenario with them really makes them think about what would happen if we got hit with ransomware, and would you pay the ransom? And challenging people with those questions, it really makes them think through how they would react in a scenario, and also reverse back to, well, if this is something that we're really worried about, then we need to invest some money in this, which is what we all need as security professionals. Right-sizing the team, making sure that you understand all the roles and responsibilities that the business is expecting from the security people who are working within it. And then deciding, like, well, are you going to have those people working directly for the organization, or are you going to outsource some of these things outside, or are you going to have some kind of a hybrid model that will work together? And what kind of flex do you have around that? If you get attacked, can you kind of flex up quickly to get the resources to go in? I had an incident response situation about 3 weeks ago where we got that horrible call at 5:30 Friday evening, bank holiday weekend. I was going, oh no, I don't believe it. I was really looking forward to a weekend off. I had to stand a team of 10 people up to come in and actually kill off an incident. And we stayed there for 3 days until we killed it off and left. And we were there doing 10-hour days. And not everybody has this well thought out in advance. You know, like this organization wouldn't have had the skills or the resources to do it. And they were kind of lucky that they didn't ring at 6:30, because we may not have responded at 6:30 to them, and they would have been stuck with it for the weekend because they didn't have 24/7 cover in place to cover them. So things like that are quite scary, you know, so making sure that you've got the right team and the right out or in-source people to respond is really important. Hiring and training and retaining staff in this space is a huge challenge at the moment. Making it attractive for people to work with you in security, to want to stay with you in security, to look at the pressures that we have in security. Like, security is well known for being an industry where there's a lot of mental health issues, actually, because it's quite stressful. You're often dealing with lack of budget, lack of people, huge challenges, business throwing things at you, things coming from left sides all the time. You know, you can't plan for a lot of things. They just happen. So it does cause a lot of stress to people, and making sure that if you've got a team working for you, that you're minding that team is really important, because otherwise they're not going to stay with you, and it'll get even worse for those that are still there. Making sure that your team are fully competent and trained to do the work that you're asking of them. Like, quite often we throw roles and jobs at people and we say, here's a new challenge for you. It's going to be really exciting for you for the year. And we don't give them the training that they need to actually fulfill that role properly. So that's something that the role of the CISO, the role of anybody in information security, we need to protect people within our team to make sure that they have this. We see a lot of organizations where they allow regulation to push all the agendas that they're running through, and it's not the same as being like, being compliant is just not the same as being secure. You can't just have a regulatory agenda. And often the very high senior management in the organization, the boards, they really just see the regulation. It's what they understand. But it's up to us to actually explain to people in a better way, to say, look, yes, we need to be compliant. We're never going to be 100% compliant on things. We need to pick the things that are important to us, but actually we need to secure what we believe we need to secure, and the compliance will follow. I think no matter what you do in the incident response space and what you plan for in there, it's never going to be like you think it's going to be on the day when you get hit with something. The panic, the stress, and the what are we going to do now, and how are we going to analyze this? So trying to get as much as you can in place, planning is really important. But if this is wrong, if your incident response goes wrong at the end of the day, the CISO is the person who's really at risk. And you often see this when the big breaches happen, 2-3 months after, you're hearing all this thing about the CISO and they were let go and they've gone somewhere else and they go to ground. And you hear comments about, well, they weren't qualified anyway. They should never have had that job. But you don't hear the bits underneath about, well, actually, they should have had 100 people in the department and they only had 50 who were working for them. And you don't hear those things, but you do hear the CISO being blamed. So it's really important to have that incident response plan, that you can whip it out and have everything ready on the day for when you need it. The key takeaways that I suppose I'd like to say to anybody who's either coming from a technology space and trying to move into a strategic space, who views themselves as a future CISO or a current CISO, or if you're a strategy person and you're saying, I want to get into the technology space, I think the key takeaways on the journey to becoming a key technological strategic advisor to your organization are to build and mind your team, make sure that your reporting lines are right, that you've got a voice when you need to have one, and that people are looking for your voice. Understand what your maturity level is, and make sure that your organization understands what your maturity level is, that you're not the one who's taking on that risk, that it's the organization who's taking on the risk, not you. Build and implement a strategy that's realistic. Like if you've got a maturity level of 1 out of 5 in your organization, it is not realistic to say we want to get to 5 out of 5 by the end of the year. So be realistic and set realistic expectations within the organization. I was speaking to people this morning, and they're trying to get from a 1 to a 2 on a maturity scale. And they were saying, but we've got a really low risk appetite. And I was saying, well, you can't have a low risk appetite and say that you want to be 2 out of 5 on a maturity scale. So you either increase your risk appetite and say, we are prepared to accept more risks, or you increase the target and the length of time where you're trying to get to. And they're the conversations that you need to be having with senior management. You need to understand your business model. There's no point being just blinkered in working on security, developing apps, pushing things out there. You really need to understand your business. Have a good incident response plan in place, just in case I didn't mention that. Understand what your threat landscape is, and aim to be viewed as a trusted advisor within your business, someone who's consulted when they're trying to innovate, rather than somebody who they just speak to at the last minute when they're thinking, oh, we're not going to get this over the line unless we go and talk to you now. Okay, so that's me. I have no idea how long I've spoken for. If anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to take them. Okay, good. All right. Thank you.